Chapter 1. This life is so miserable. I feel like I'm choking because I can't even decide on my own. Princess Purity sighed as she dropped a box of expensive jewelry in front of her queen mother. Princess Purity, your father's decision is against my will, but we have to follow his command. Queen Sasa held the princess's hands to calm her feelings. Your Majesty, I am saddened by my king father's decision because I don't want to marry that prince. The princess's tears flowed down her charming face. She could not accept the king's sudden decision because she had never seen the prince. Get dressed because your king father has called a gathering and I'm sure he'll discuss about your marriage to the prince, Queen Sasa replied as she tapped the princess on the shoulder. Your Majesty, please make a way to oppose my king father's decision, Princess Purity pleaded as she hugged her queen mother. Princess Purity, be prepared because Freya will come later to accompany you to the king, Queen Sasa said as she hurried away. Princess Purity was left stunned with resentment. Just minutes later Freya, Princess Purity's personal assistant, arrived. Freya took the princess's golden cape and put it on her back. She pressed the buzzer and the two slaves arrived. One slave carried the princess's large umbrella and the other slave holds the gown so that it doesn't lean on the floor. In just 10 minutes they reached the king's throne and they saw the king together with the two queens, Queen Sasa and Queen Cleopatra, as well as Princess Vanya. Princess Purity bowed her head and immediately freed her slaves. Your Majesty, good morning, said Princess Purity to her king father as she bowed her head. She noticed that Queen Cleopatra and Princess Vanya were staring at her fiercely. Queen Cleopatra was wearing a yellow gown while Princess Vanya was wearing a pink gown and each of their crowns was gleaming. Princess Purity wondered at the stares of the two, but she ignored them and thought of sitting next to her mother, Queen Sasa, who was even more beautiful because of her gold gown and glittering crown. Princess Purity, come here beside me, said the king as he stood up. He was dressed in a coat of blue silk and wore a crown with red precious stones on each side and with sparkling diamonds on top. I called an urgent meeting because I want to inform you all that Princess Purity will marry the Prince of Gazoo, and this has been approved by the King of Gazoo and we have already agreed on it, King Zooper happily announced. Your Majesty, Princess Purity is too young to get married, Queen Sasa commented as she stood up. The 18th birthday of the dear princess is approaching and after the celebration I will send her to Gazoo Kingdom to stay for 5 months before the wedding, the king firmly said. Your Majesty, I'm not yet ready to get married, the princess sadly said. She could not help but shed tears because her royal father's decision was against her will. Your Majesty, why not let Princess Vanya to marry the Prince of Gazoo? Queen Cleopatra suggested as she glanced at Princess Purity. The Gazoo Kingdom is one of the most powerful and famous kingdom and whoever opposes my decision will be punished, said the king as his face flushed with rage. Your Majesty, please forgive me for what I've said earlier, said Queen Cleopatra as she trembled slightly at the king's response. Princess Purity, you must have heard it well, don't break my order. The king replied angrily as he frowned. Your Majesty, I haven't seen the prince and I don't want to marry someone that I didn't know, the princess pleaded as tears welled up in her eyes. Princess Purity, don't embarrass me with the King of Gazoo. Follow my order and don't disobey me because whoever disagrees with what I have proposed will be punished, replied the king as he frowned in frustration and slammed the chair in front of him. Princess Purity stood up and went to her queen mother and sobbed. Your Majesty, I am ready in case your decision changes and I will wholeheartedly accept if you wish to marry me to the Prince of Gazoo, Princess Vanya courageously said to her royal father. You are too young, Princess Vanya, and my decision to marry Princess Purity to the Prince of Gazoo is final and nothing will stop it, the king replied to the princess in a calm voice. Princess Vanya nodded and glared at Princess Purity who moaned as she hugged her mother. I hope that all I'm saying is clear to all of you and I don't want to hear any suggestions from anyone, the king squealed loudly in front of them. Your Majesty, don't worry because we've got what you want to convey for us, Queen Cleopatra answered while bowing her head. I am glad to hear your sincere support and I am doing this for the sake of our palace, King Zupir added as he smiled at Queen Cleopatra. Your Majesty, can we leave now? Queen Cleopatra asked and stood up as she stroked Princess Banya's hair. The gathering is over so you can leave if you want. The king nodded while staring at Princess Purity who was still sobbing. Queen Cleopatra and Princess Banya quickly left while smirking at the sobbing Princess Purity and even threw an evil look at her. Princess, don't worry because I will find out the personality of the Prince of Gazoo to calm your mood. Queen Sasa tapped Princess Purity's shoulder and massaged her back. Your Majesty, I'm scared because I haven't seen my fiancé yet, Princess Purity replied as she wiped the tears that dripped down her cheeks. I felt the same way when I was married to your king father but eventually I learned to love him, said Queen Sasa while helping to wipe the tears that flowed from Princess's eyes. A few minutes later, the king allowed Princess Purity's attendants to enter inside his throne to assist the princess to return to her private room. Queen Cleopatra's Pav. She was Queen Cleopatra, the second queen of Zhuan Kingdom. Her king father married her to King Zupir because their kingdom was about to fall. King Zupir liked her because of her alluring beauty. She looked like a goddess with her blonde wavy hair and she had smooth skin. Her body was well-shaped and she was as tall as the king. Princess Banya became their child and Princess Purity was a year older than her. She loved Princess Banya and she would do everything for her. She wants her princess to be the next queen of the famous Gazoo kingdom and she will use her power to fulfill her dream. Queen Cleopatra hit the buzzer and one of her servants arrived. Your Majesty, do you need anything? The slave asked as she bowed her head. She wore a red top with a collar and was paired with white trousers as a sign that she was the messenger inside the palace. I want you to call the chief chef of the palace, the queen said sarcastically as she smirked at the slave in front of her. Your Majesty, your request will be granted, the slave said calmly as she bowed her head and hurried away. Heidi, the chief cook of the palace, came and was secretly spoken by the queen. Your Majesty, I can't do what you ordered. I'm scared, Heidi replied sadly as he peeked behind him to make sure no one could hear their intensive conversation. Do what I told you or else I will evict you and your family from the palace, said the queen with glaring eyes as she stepped on Heidi's foot. Your Majesty, I'm sorry but I'm having a hard time deciding because what you're asking me to do is so hard. Heidi seemed to have lost his strength because of what the queen had ordered him to do. Think carefully of what I said if you still want your family to stay inside the palace. The queen's evil gaze struck him and he could not help but tremble at every word that Queen Cleopatra uttered. Your Majesty, forgive me but my conscience can't handle what you're asking me to do. Heidi blushed as he noticed on the queen's face the extreme frustration with him. If you still love your family, do what I want because maybe the next day you won't see them again. The queen suddenly left because Heidi didn't utter even a single word. Perhaps the queen thought he was confused. Cold morning dawned on Princess Purity and she decided to bathe in the man-made lake inside the palace. She requested her servants to put roses and fragrant flowers in the water and happily paddled while smelling its fragrant scents. She enjoyed and immersed herself in the water. Her food porter arrived and it was laid out in her cottage. She smelled the delicious food and felt hungry, so she thought of removing herself from the water and was helped by her two assistants. The princess's saliva dripped because of its enticing smell and she immediately tasted it. Wow! So yummy and strangely delicious. I just now tasted this kind of recipe, the princess said to Freya while eating a lot because of the appetizing color of the food and its dripping saliva smell. Your Highness, I think the food is so delicious because its color is enticing, Freya replied as she poured cold water into the glass for the princess to drink. This dish is unique because the delicious taste is stirring the stomach. Maybe the palace has a new chef, Princess Purity said as she chuckled and even smiled at Freya as she slowly chewed the food. While the princess enjoyed eating, she suddenly became pale and dizzy. The princess vomited and suddenly lost consciousness. Princess! Princess! Said Freya bewildered. Help! Help! Please help the princess! The two servants shouted.